We're going to start out with a quote from Socrates, and I'm going to bring this up on the internet. See how I can share. Can everyone see my screen? Okay, was everyone able to hear that? Could you see it? Did you see it? Okay, great. So it was transcribed, but I will tell you what it was. That was U.S. Senator Cory Booker from New Jersey quoting Socrates. And I will tell you what happened. So last time we talked about the ancient Greek philosophers, and we talked about one of the most notable and oldest ancient Greek philosophers who lived in 600 BC. His name was Socrates. He was somewhat of an enigma. He was a warrior. He fought in ancient Greece during the dead of winter with no shoes. And he would also try to get people involved in philosophical dialogue. So one day a man in Athens walks up to Socrates and says, "Oh, I just heard something about your friend. I got to tell you this rumor." And Socrates says, "Hold on. Before you tell me this, then this statement needs to pass through 3 tests. Is it true?" The man says, "Well, I just heard it." "No." Socrates says, "Is it good?" The man says, "No, this rumor is not good at all." And then Socrates says, "Is it useful?" And the man says, "Not particularly." Then Socrates says, "You know what? If what you're about to tell me is not true, it's not good, and it's not useful, I don't want to hear it." So what does that tell you about Socrates' ethics?
He only
Joel?
wanted like positivity.
Good, good. He only wanted to hear something was positive. And what else, Tiffany?
He only wanted to hear that he wanted to hear it if it was true. So if it's not true, there's no use for it at all.
Exactly. Exactly. And then the last one was useful. What does that tell you?
Well, if it's not true, it's not useful information. So
Okay, good. Excellent. I'm going to upload our module 2 live session slide. So that gives you some idea about Socrates' ethics. We're going to take those notions, we're going to compare them to the 2 philosophers that we're studying this week. One is Immanuel Kant. He's a German philosopher from the Enlightenment period. The Enlightenment period was in the 1700s. the Enlightenment period, those ideas very heavily influenced our own forefathers like Thomas Jefferson and James Madison. The Enlightenment thought is really what helped to create the United States. The United States forefathers were very influenced by this movement called Enlightenment in the 1700s. So Kant was in Germany, and Kant wrote several books. What Kant said, when it talks about ethic, when you're talking about ethics, what matters is the categorical imperative. Well, what's that? He says, well, act according to that rule, which at the same time you can will that it's a universal moral law. So Kant says that ethics is about following universal moral laws that apply all across the globe and in every situation. One of those is truth, right? Don't lie, don't murder, don't steal, don't kill, don't commit suicide. Because if everyone does all of those things, society will fail, right? If everyone was to lie all the time about everything, if heart surgeons were going to lie about stuff all the time, heart surgery would fail. If doctors would lie about medicine all the time, medical treatment would fail. If nurses would lie about the patient's condition all the time, nursing would fail. If lawyers lied about the facts all the time, the lawsuits, we can't win a lawsuit based on lies usually, and the legal profession will not have any integrity or respect. So for Kant, ethics is about following universal moral laws, and one of them is don't lie. Notice Socrates said the same thing. If you're going to tell me something, it has to be true, it has to be good, and it has to be, what was the third thing? Starts with a U.
Useful.
Brilliant. Now let's talk about usefulness. That's Jeremy Bentham. Jeremy Bentham's philosophy was called utilitarianism. His ethics says, look, the point of ethics is to reduce suffering and increase pleasure. So if what you're going to tell me isn't useful to the extent that it can increase pleasure, minimize suffering, okay, then it is not useful. So for Jeremy Bentham, the moral question is, can an entity reason? No. Can they talk? No. The question is, can they suffer? So if an animal can experience suffering, they're entitled to moral consideration. If a child can experience suffering, they're entitled to moral consideration. That's why we have laws against child labor, against child abuse, against child neglect. People could have their parental rights terminated for using marijuana or other drugs because children are entitled to moral consideration and they're too small to protect themselves. These ideas came out of utilitarianism. So for Jeremy Bentham, a statement that is not useful need not be said. So I think it's interesting that Socrates, who lived in 600 BC, had already clued into the fact that if something is not true, if it's not good, and if it's not useful, it doesn't need to be done. It doesn't. And, I think that our society could benefit a little bit from Socrates' wisdom. So when I saw Senator Cory Booker from New Jersey make that statement today and put it on social media, I really, it caught my attention because it's exactly what we're talking about this week, which is moral theory. So our discussion this week is about duty, and that's Kant's ethics, which is based on following universal moral laws, and the good, which is Jeremy Bentham's philosophy, which is that we should be maximizing the pleasure, minimizing the suffering, and that is what's going to create moral goodness. So last week we talked a little bit about moral theory, and we're back for more moral theory because that's what philosophers do. We really get into theories, where other people are concerned with things that are tangible. Philosophers like me, we're just really into theory. So a moral theory is an explanation of what makes an action right or what makes a person or thing good. Theories concerned with the rightness or wrongness of actions are moral theories. Moral theories are concerned with judgments and principles. We talked a little bit about consequentialism. Consequentialist theory simply means that the morality of the action is judged by its consequences. And an example that I've heard recently is from World War II. World War II is the first time that America detonated an atomic bomb. We used two against Japan. After Japan, first of all, attacked the military bases in Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. The United States response to that was to drop two atomic bombs in Japan, one on Hiroshima, the other one in Nagasaki. So that killed about 400,000 people. Would you say that was moral, Tiffany, for the United States to kill 400,000 people?
I wouldn't say it was necessarily moral, but I think unfortunately at that time it was like a necessary evil.
Excellent. And that would be justified by utilitarianism because the consequence was to get Japan out of World War II. And that pretty much ended it for Japan's involvement in World War II. And the people that were killed were a lot of innocent women and children who had nothing to do with the politics of Japan or Japan's decision to bomb the military base of the United States in Pearl Harbor. So it's really it's tough. Those individuals suffered. They were relatively innocent. And there was a lot of discrimination against Japanese Americans and Japanese immigrants who came to California. But that's a completely separate issue. Anyway, there was a lot of discrimination against ethnicities who were associated with World War II, and including people who were Austrian Americans as well, because they were seen to be associated with Germans. Anyway, the point being that some people think that it was wrong for the United States to bomb Nagasaki and Hiroshima because it killed innocent people. Which moral thinker do you think would say that dropping atomic bombs is wrong? Joel, let's see if Joel can tell me this one. Which moral thinker would say that it's wrong to drop atomic bombs that kill people? Are you there, Joel? Can you unmute yourself? Which moral thinker would think it was wrong to drop atomic bombs? Jeremy Bentham's utilitarianism would say that it's okay to drop bombs because the end justifies the means. Like Tiffany said, it's a necessary evil. It was a necessary evil for us to drop bombs to get Japan out of World War II and to end the war. That means that's the end justifying the means. Which moral thinker is concerned with the morality of the action and wants us to follow universal moral laws like thou shalt not kill? Faith, what do you think? Which moral thinker would think that it's wrong to drop bombs?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Would it be Kant?
Yeah, it's Kant. He's German.
My apologies.
That's okay. Everybody I know says Kant, especially in America. That's probably the translation. They would say that would be anglicized, but it's Kant because he was German. So yes, Kant wants us to follow universal moral laws. So according to Kant, let's use this scenario. If someone comes to your house in the middle of the night with a gun, you don't know them. They knock on your door, Faith, and say, "Are your children home tonight?" What do you do if you believe in Kantian ethics?
And just kind of hope that nothing happens. Hope that he's going to be moral enough to not hurt anybody, regardless of, you know, I wouldn't, definitely not. But if that was, Kant's mindset, that would probably be how he goes.
Okay, if you're the homeowner and someone comes to your door that you don't know in the middle of the night with a gun, what is it that you do? So now the question is about your moral actions in response to this man with a gun at your door. And here's his question: are your children home tonight? How do
I
you?
would I would definitely say no, they're not home. Absolutely not.
Okay, see, that's lying. And see, Kant says that we can't lie. What if you have a gun that you use for your own protection? Suppose you're in Colorado. Colorado is a stand your ground, make my day state. I lived there for like 10 years. So,
So is Florida.
okay, yeah. So, yeah, if somebody is on your property with a gun threatening your life, what would you do? You have a gun for your protection and you're trained to use it. What would you do, Tiffany?
Use my gun.
Yeah. And see, that's utilitarianism. That's when you have to kill someone or wound somebody because the means justify the end. This person's an intruder. They're on your property unlawfully. They have a gun. They're threatening you and your family. The ends justify the means, right?
I actually just read a story right before I got on for the class on Monday. A mother in Michigan was in the shower and her kids started screaming and she jumped out of the shower and there was an intruder in the home and she shot him and killed him
Good for her. I
because
mean,
he was coming in there and she was in the shower and her kids were in the house, with her. So
yes, in most states, that would be legally justified. That's self-defense or defense of others. And ethically, if you believe in utilitarianism, she minimized suffering, right? She killed one person, but she saved herself and her children. And guess what? Three is greater than one. So if you kill one intruder, but you save three other innocent lives, utilitarianism says that's perfectly okay according to the utilitarian measures. So you weigh the good and you weigh the bad. And if the good outweighs the bad, then utilitarianism says that's the morally correct action. That's why self-defense is justified. But again, let's talk about Kant's ethics, which are very rigid. Kant says even in that situation, you should tell the truth. You need to tell you need to tell the intruder that your children are home and you can't shoot them. That's Kantian ethics. That's a moral absolutism. That's an adherence to rigid moral laws without any concern for consequences. So that would be understood to be non-consequentialism. So a non-consequentialist moral theory is concerned only with following your moral duties, and your actions need to be moral. It's not that you're looking at the consequence, it's that you're looking at the act itself. Pulling out your gun in self-defense is shooting somebody. According to Kant, that's murder. That's wrong. And certainly you could still be arrested if the police come to your house and somebody's dead and you're still alive. You're the one they're going to arrest, right? So according to Kant, in the categorical imperative, we have to act according with universal moral laws. Thou shalt not kill, don't steal, don't lie, don't commit suicide. These things are all wrong. If everyone does this, then society would fail. So one aspect of Kantian ethics is this rule of reversal, that something can only be moral if I do it, if it's moral when it's done to me as well. So if I shoot someone, the only way that could be moral is if it would be moral for them to be able to shoot me as well. So with these rigid rules, Kant says everything we have to follow universal moral laws without exception. Kant also believes in an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. So for Kant, capital punishment is totally okay, because if you take someone's life, your life should be taken as well, because that satisfies the rule of reversal. You've taken someone's life, your life gets taken as well. Eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. And again, the moral laws are followed. You killed someone, then you get killed. So Kant would completely be in support of retribution. A penal system is based on retribution and capital punishment. Any comments about that? Diane, do you support Kantian ethics?
No, I do not.
Why not?
Because if somebody's knocking on my door and asks if my children are there, I'm gonna lie.
Yes, human survival is a basic instinct, and it's a powerful instinct. So is the maternal and fatherly instinct to protect children. So I find that interesting, and we will talk about natural law as a moral theory. Natural law theory says that the morally right action is one that follows the dictates of nature. Um, so there's certain laws that have to be followed according to natural law. According to natural law theorists, lying goes against human nature, maybe for some people. Telling the truth is more natural for humans because there are social creatures with an inborn tendency to care about the welfare of others. Truth telling helps human beings get along and maintain viable societies and shows respect for others. So, natural law theory is simply another moral theory. Positive law, which are the written laws that we follow, do not always law, and certainly they don't always follow Kantian ethics either. Because there is a strong tendency in our society to follow utilitarianism. And certainly, utilitarianism would justify homicide to someone who is threatening the life of you, or if you act in defense of others. So, utilitarianism is a very, very powerful moral concept in our society. Can you think of another moral issue, Tiffany, where utilitarianism seems to be what society or our government uses to resolve issues? What kind of ethical dilemmas are facing America today or the American government?
Oh man, we don't have enough time for that.
Pick the one that starts with C.
Climate change.
Okay, good. Climate change. So climate change in 1970, Richard Nixon was president. He was not all bad. Um, One of the things Richard Nixon did is realize that the environment needed to be protected. He created the Environmental Protection Agency in 1970. Out of that, we got several laws. One was the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act. We got laws against dumping. We got CERCLA, which is a comprehensive liability law, which says anybody who has owned any land where there's a toxic situation is responsible for remediation and the removal of toxins at their cost. So these are very powerful environmental laws we have. We have a law that limits the amount of pollution that can be put out by a factory. They're only allowed to put out certain parts per million into the air. And if they want to pollute more, they have to buy the right to pollute more from the government. So President Nixon created the Environmental Protection Agency in 1970. We got a lot of very, very powerful laws coming out of that. So what are those laws based on? I believe they're based on utilitarianism. They're saying that in the interest of the greater good, we've got to restrict the behavior of businesses to protect the environment. So that would follow along with the dictates of utilitarianism because everybody needs a place to live, right? And it's in the interest of the greater good for us to have environmental laws. Now, on the other hand, there are people that say, look, it would be cheaper for American businesses if we didn't have environmental laws, if they could pollute as much as they want, if they could pay people the least amount of money and just maximize their profits. But the government is not allowing that. Our labor laws are all based on utilitarianism. Right around the 1930s, we had children working in factories. They couldn't go to school. They needed to help their families raise money to eat. So they were working in dirty factories.
Or do you ever see the pictures of the little kids working in the coal mines and in the
Yeah.
chimneys? Because they were small enough to fit in there. So that's why they put them in there.
Yes. And Jeremy Bentham is all about, look, if a child can experience suffering, they are entitled to moral consideration. So as a result, America has passed laws against child labor, laws that require a minimum wage, laws that require overtime, and also laws that require workers' compensation, because people were getting injured in factories, then they couldn't work. So they would just be laying in these slums that were developing around factories. That's when slums first really started to become a problem. Again, it was the early 1900s, because we did not have labor laws at the time. If someone was injured and couldn't work, they lost their salary. Now they have no way of working. So with workers' compensation, you now have a sort of a that's part of the social welfare state that protects workers, because it's in the interest of the greater good to have these benefits to protect people and families. So President Franklin Delano Roosevelt, FDR, was really behind what was called the New Deal in the 1930s, which got us all of these protections for workers and the right to unionize, which anyone who has a job that's union makes a lot more money and they get better benefits. I've seen grocery stores out here in Las Vegas that are not unionized, and they're out there protesting. Like, I stopped going to this one place called Glazier's because they were always protesting because they don't have a union and they're not as much as employees who have a strong union backing them. So all of that is in the interest of the greater good. So when people are attacking welfare, what they're attacking is a social welfare state that expands protections in the greater good of workers and Americans. And the whole point is to minimize suffering. I would rather see people get workers' comp if they've worked and been injured than seeing people lay on the side of the street, right? With nothing. That does not benefit the greater good of society. It's also not safe. So if people would think through some of these concepts and understand that utilitarianism is a very, very strong motivating factor for public policy. The COVID laws, when I was saying, see, you came up with climate change, which is excellent. Another one has been the COVID policies and this fighting. And it goes back to the same thing. The people that are against the restrictions want some sort of personal autonomy. The thing is when you agree to live in a society, you give up your personal freedom and autonomy for the greater good of society. Our Constitution gives states the right to regulate for the safety, health, and well-being of anyone that lives in that state. That's in the Constitution. That is why governors are coming up with all these policies. I live in Nevada. Steve Sisolak is our governor. For 2 years, we had a mask mandate. I don't know many other states that had a mask mandate for 2 years. A lot of places had them for like 6 months. So I
I
decided,
think we only had them for 3 months.
yeah, because the governor has
Yes.
the authority to decide, in his or her state, what is necessary for the health and safety and welfare of Americans. That's under the Constitution. It's very difficult to change the Constitution that was written in 1787. The Bill of Rights was added in 1791. So if anybody thinks that Constitution that's 235 years old is getting ready to change because they don't like the state's mandates, no. So, so sometimes I would just go up to Utah, because maybe the COVID numbers, I'm only an hour and a half from Utah. I'm only 2 hours from Arizona. So I would just go to those states and vacation there, sometimes to be free of the mask or just to get away from COVID because, certainly in Utah, a lot of times the numbers were lower. Or I could, just to be in a different state where I don't have to wear a mask. But anyway, the purpose of having those mask laws, those mandates, are for the social welfare. And some of the Democratic states believe more so in an expansion of these social welfare states. The concept again of mandatory vaccination is part of the social welfare state, and it's for utility. The more people who are vaccinated, according to science, the less COVID can spread because it can't find a host. I personally will admit I've had 4 doses of the vaccine. I have not had COVID. I'm going to get my 5th dose next month. 5, that's a lot of shots. But it's in the interest of the greater good because it means not only am I less likely to get COVID or be hospitalized, it means I'm also less likely to transmit COVID. People who've been vaccinated, it's much harder for their bodies to serve as a host for COVID. So sadly, because COVID mutates, that means the vaccines are less effective. So this next vaccine that comes out in September will be good against some of the variants. But that's the purpose of the COVID mandates, is to minimize suffering. The employers, like the military, the Department of Defense requires everybody in the military to be vaccinated. Um, Unless you have a religious or medical excuse that you don't have to be. That's because that is in the interest of the greater good. The more people who are vaccinated, the less COVID you have. The more people who wear masks correctly, the less COVID can spread. Again, I see my neighbors, they got the mask around their chin. It's like a chin guard. No, that's not doing anything. But the purpose of all of these COVID restrictions is to benefit the greater good of society by slowing the spread of COVID. And it also helps businesses to stay open. If all the employees are vaccinated and they're wearing masks, sometimes that means less employees are sick, businesses can stay open. Nobody wants to be stuck at home. Did anybody enjoy the quarantine of 2020? That period where we were all under lockdown? Did anybody enjoy that?
It honestly didn't change my life very much.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I got to focus on some things I hadn't really focused on, and read some books and do some things I hadn't really done. But overall, I like to be able to go out freely, enjoy my freedom as an American and my personal autonomy to go places. I was thrilled. Like, I remember in April 2020 going to a restaurant once lockdown was over and being like, oh my gosh, I'm in this Marriott and I'm able to eat some food. And everybody was kind of looking at everybody else because they weren't wearing their masks when they were chewing. And it was just this weird thing. But I like to have some kind of personal autonomy and
It
freedom.
was just hard to explain it to the kids, I guess, like why we couldn't go and do things on the weekend. Because that's usually we go out and do stuff on the weekends, and I'm like, nothing's open. We can't do anything.
And there's so much fun stuff to do in Florida. I mean, you want to be out doing some fun stuff and getting exercise, getting fresh air. I mean, it is not good for mental health for folks to be locked in. We know that. We saw a lot of the mental health decline because people were in lockdown, not socializing. I still know some people who are afraid to socialize. I'm like, if your governor does not have a restriction, you probably can go out and socialize. But I still know people who are afraid to go out and socialize,
We were one of the first states to drop our restrictions, so it didn't last very
Yes.
long down here. But after they did all their studies, we ended up being like one of the best states towards the end, like with low infections, surprisingly, because they were
That
like,
is
"Oh, you're gonna
great.
you're just gonna kill everybody in the state of Florida," and it wasn't like that.
No, the media really drove a lot of fear into the minds of people, and I think
Mhm,
they exaggerated a whole lot.
mhm.
And part of it is for normal, healthy Americans, they're they're not going to, a normal, healthy American is not going to die because they have
Mm-mm.
contracted COVID.
Right.
They're just
And
not
so
going
most of
to.
them were, underlying conditions, older people. And I mean, like I said, I've worked in and out of healthcare for 20 years. So I've been in and out of nursing homes as well, even with nursing school. And a lot of those people are in there because their families they don't have the means to take care of them. They need that medical care around the clock. And when you've got a building full of people that need medical care around the clock from 70s to 90s, yeah, that's going to spread quickly because they're pretty much inside most of the time.
Yeah, that was a tough situation. There was no social distancing. And in 2020, there was no vaccine. So it was very tough,
Mm-hmm.
and it was a very sad situation. And again, utility is such a huge focus in terms of medical treatment and how vaccines are rolled out. I personally, do not feel that the vaccine was rolled out in a way that was very efficient and effective. It was actually very difficult for me to sign up to get the first dose, and they wanted to see all this information and insurance cards and this, that. The government was like, oh, everybody can get the vaccine. No, that's not true. You have to jump through a lot of hoops, especially in the beginning, to get the vaccine and show a lot of information. I had to prove I was a teacher. I had to show my insurance card and all this and that. They said the vaccine was free for everybody, but no, it really wasn't. So I don't really feel that the way the vaccine has been rolled out was really all that ethical. Most children are still not vaccinated. They didn't do enough studies and tests on children to see what the impact was. So I don't really feel like the rollout of the vaccine has really been very efficient, but it is what it is. But yet, COVID restrictions, that whole notion is based on utilitarianism. It's what's in the interest of the greater good, and the governor basically decides what that is. Any comments about utilitarianism? Let's talk about a theory that's more selfish, and that's ethical egoism. Ethical egoism is also a consequentialist theory. So, ethical egoism says that the morally right action is the one that produces the most favorable balance of good over evil for yourself. And in every situation, the right action advances your own best interest. Examples would be price gouging during a natural disaster. And we've just seen a lot of price gouging, in these inflationary tactics that have occurred in the last year. I'm sure that some supply chains are disrupted due to COVID, but certainly corporations have exploited price gouging. Price gouging during a natural disaster back in Hurricane Katrina, people were not able to suppliers were not able to get in and out of the affected area with their trucks. So whatever supplies were left in the store owners started charging $10 for a bottle of water, $10 for a loaf of bread, because they could. The traditional economic theory of prices is based on supply and demand. When demand is high, but the supply is low because there's a hurricane, no one can get in and out of the affected area, that drives the value of the item up. Anytime the supply chain is threatened or limited, but the demand is still high. So during Hurricane Katrina, a lot of people lost their homes. They were forced to stay in hotels. What do you think hotel owners did, Tiffany?
Jack the price up because they knew they could.
Exactly. And fortunately, certain states have laws, like Mississippi has a law about how much you can charge for a hotel room. So there are limits.
I think we have price gouging laws too because of hurricanes. Because hurricane season started in July and it goes to November. So we've got months of this.
Yes. Yeah, I grew up in Virginia, and you lived in Virginia too. So we know about hurricanes, and definitely down in Florida, it's a major problem.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where the law steps in and says, look, we know business owners are going to be ethical egoists. They're going to try to get as much money as they can for supplies and goods during a time of natural disaster when demand is up, supplies down, because nobody can get in or out of the affected area with goods and supplies. So they charge more. So fortunately, there are laws now against price gouging to regulate that immoral behavior. So another thing that occurred is we saw these gas prices rising crazily. There were some reasons. The war in Russia, Putin threatening gas supplies, him cutting off some European countries from the availability of oil, the price of oil going from $40 a barrel to $100 a barrel. That did affect, the gas prices here. And then on top of that, I'm not sure if anyone remembers, but there was a ransom and a cyber attack on a couple of major oil companies.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yes, where again the supply was threatened and they had to pay a huge ransom. I don't know if it was $1 million or $2 million in Bitcoin that had to be paid to the ransomers. So again, what did they do? That price was, that price had to be passed on to Faith says that her work was down a week due to that ransom. So yeah, when things like that happen, when a supply of oil or gas is threatened by ransom, people are attacking, cyber attackers like that, that's going to drive the price of that item up. So, some people blame the president. President had really nothing to do with inflation. Inflation has been a result of several other factors. One just being a limit on supplies due to several reasons, and a huge increase around the globe for demand for oil. Also, companies or businesses are looking at the fact that we got several stimulus checks, and some people were still working and got the stimulus check. So that means there was a surplus of money put into the economy. So companies are like, we can start charging more because they have more money, right? And Americans are working more. There's very low unemployment. There's actually a job surplus. There are not enough people to work the jobs that are available. People working 2 or 3 jobs. That also tells companies, corporations, just increase the price. And now the way that the business world works, the same company owns the store on the left side and the right side of the street. They're all owned by huge corporate conglomerates. So there's no true competition. There used to be competition between store A and store B. Store A would lower their prices a little bit and get more customers. If I can buy something at Walmart for 88 cents or 188 or 288, I'm going to buy it there. But if the same company owns the store on the left and the right hand of the street, they can just charge a high price and let it sit. And then you have to pay whatever price they ask for because there's no real competition, because the same corporate conglomerate owns the stores on both sides of the street. And that's kind of where we are now. So if one or two companies own all of the businesses, they can just charge high prices and say, hey, Americans are working. You guys are working 1 or 2 jobs. You got your stimulus checks, and some of you haven't spent that check yet. We're just going to charge more for goods and services because we can. So, there's a lot of price gouging going on. And is that ethical? It's ethical egoism because it certainly helps whoever owns those companies and whoever has, owns shares of their stock or is making money off of all this inflation. So that's an example of ethical egoism. Anytime someone owns a business and they're raising their prices to exploit consumers and to put more money in their pocket. Insider trading. Martha Stewart was charged with insider trading about 20 years ago. She owned shares in a medical company and they were working on experimental drugs. Well, someone found out that the drug that they were working on was going to be rejected by the FDA. The day before that became public, someone told Martha so she could dump all of her shares before the value went down because everybody had so much hope in this experimental drug, so they invested in this company. But then as soon as the FDA rejects the drug, the company's shares are worthless. So Martha had that inside information. She only made $200,000 on it, but she was charged with insider trading. And then she went into court and perjured herself. So she ended up going to prison for perjury. They didn't even have to prove the insider trading. They just put her in prison for perjury, which seems pretty extreme given what we see people doing every day now, treason, sedition, threatening to going into the White House, threatening to take over the government and this kind of stuff. It seems like what she did is kind of minor, but she surely went to prison for the perjury. But that was an example of ethical egoism. Martha knew that she had inside information and it was not legal to trade on that information, but she did anyway because she knew her stock would be worthless the next day. When that information became public, she used it when it was not known and dumped the shares of stock. So that's insider trading. That was her being selfish, and for sure she went to prison for it. Any questions about ethical egoism? So we have an ongoing discussion forum, which is asking you to explain a time when you had to act in your own best interest, and hopefully everyone has participated in that. Let's talk about your Module 2 assignment. So we're getting into our course project paper. This is where you are going to act as if you're at a job fair and you're providing information to potential applicants and potential employees about the ethics of your company. So you have to create a frequently asked question list which answers the following questions. The first, what are ethics? 2, why do ethics vary from person to person? 3, what are the key features of consequentialist theories? Utilitarianism and ethical egoism. 4, what are the key features of utilitarianism? 5, what are the key features of ethical egoism? 6, what are the differences between utilitarianism and ethical egoism? Since we're talking about moral theory, you will need to cite the sources. Your textbook is an excellent source of definitions of utilitarian and ethical egoism. You can also find something on an academic website or in the Rasmussen Library, but you will need to cite the sources following the APA format with in-text citations and a list of references. Be sure to answer all 6 questions, and that assignment is due on Sunday, August 21st at midnight Central Standard Time. The best way to get an A on this paper is to simply answer all of those questions, proofread your essay, and follow the APA format. Any questions, Tiffany, Faith, Diane, or Joel, about this Module 2 assignment? Should be double spaced. Standard 12-point New Times Roman font. Well, if that's all, we will wrap up our Module 2 live session and your live session for this question for this week. And your daughter might be able to answer this, Tiffany, is what is the categorical imperative according to Kant? You can get the answer from what we talked about in the live session. You could also Google it.
She said she didn't know.
She just needs to Google it. Does she have a tablet?
No, she's not allowed to have them.
Okay.
She uses her computers at school, and that's it. Too much technology on the fingertips of these kids today. So
I agree.
I try to rein it back in. So no, they don't have tablets like every other kid. They don't have cell phones like half the kids in her first grade class. I just think it's ridiculous.
It is. I agree with you. By the time you're maybe 12 or 13, you're ready for a cell phone, but
yeah,
that you need to at least be a teenager.
Yeah. Well, I'm showing my age. That I didn't have one until I was 16, but cell phones were really expensive when I was a teenager and not everybody had them.
No. God, when I was in college, if you wanted to see somebody, you put your sneakers on and walked to their house.
Yeah. Or you called their dorm room.
Yeah.
Phones then. I explained that to her one day and she thought I was a nut. She's like, what do you mean nobody can get a hold of you if you're not home? I'm like, they just had to wait until we got home.
Yeah, or get on your bike and you ride your bike to the drugstore and see if they're at the grocery store. I remember doing that, looking for my best friend. I'm like, let me ride my bike over by school. Maybe she's behind the school,
Yeah, and I tell her all the time, I'm like, I miss the days when there were no cell phones because now you have to have one. I'm like, I would love nothing than to leave my house and know that no one can get a hold of me until I get home.
Yes. And yeah, a lot of times, I used to just not answer the cell phone at all because I was getting a lot of marketing calls, people sending me extended warranties, vacation packages. And I missed a call from a student once. She was like, why didn't you answer the phone? I'm like, I thought it was somebody selling a vacation package. I didn't even know it was you, So now I am I got my phone on and I'm looking at it all the time because I definitely do not like to have a cell phone disturbing me 24/7 or emails. I like to turn my emails off when I'm working and doing stuff too. It's totally an intrusion on your life.
Well, and it's just like a distraction. Like I'll be in the middle of something and then I hear a ding or a text go out and it like just takes your mind right away from what you're doing. And we've just come so reliant on them. You can't stand not to see what it is because you just hear it.
You're right. I agree with you fully. And again, it goes back to ethics, wanting to have the sanctity of the home, wanting to have some kind of personal autonomy and your own freedom and your own belief system, one that's not based totally on technology. That's why for the most part, I do not watch TV. I do not need to see all that stuff all the time, all that negativity when there's a lot of positive stuff happening. but the TV is never showing that. So.
I watch a lot of historical stuff, so
Oh.
that makes me happy.
Yeah, I
And
love
there's a lot of bad
watching.
stuff that happened in history, but it's good to know.
No, I agree with you. I love watching history. I love watching war. I like to hear about World War II, World War I, the Civil War, Revolution. I love history.
Me
I
too.
like the History Channel. But yeah, a lot of this other stuff that's on the news and some of these shows, I feel
Well,
like it's poison.
That's why I want to end up in Europe, because Europe is the United States is a great country, but like I said before, it's a very young country, and I want the old stuff. So,
I understand you very well. And I know I've watched TV before. Definitely Australia's news. It's really, really good. It's very intelligent. It's more balanced. They're much more calm and honest when they tell their news. I'm like, let me just watch Australia's news so I can get some information that's unbiased about what's happening. And it goes back to your ethics, how you want to live, what you believe in, your moral standards. And like you said the first day, moral compass. So that's our live module 2 live session. So be sure to submit the correct answer to the question, what is the categorical imperative according to Immanuel Kant? And be sure to submit your module 2 assignments and participate in the discussion forum about ethical egoism by Sunday at midnight Central Standard Time. Any questions, Joel, Diane, Faith, Tiffany?
I have a
Thank
question.
you. Yes.
For our assignment, do we put it down as the question and then put the answer below that?
Yes, you can look on the internet for a sample FAQ sheet and simply do what a standard FAQ sheet would have, which is the question and then the answer. It should be written in paragraph form, standard prose, complete sentences, and proper grammar.
Do we need a title page?
Yes, APA format is required by Rasmussen University. So yes, APA title page, course number, your name, all of that stuff.
Okay, thank you.
Didn't they just
You're
change
welcome.
APA in the last couple of years, where I know a couple years ago we had to have like the running header plus the page number, but now it's just the page number, right?
It's just the page number, and you don't need the author's note either.
Okay.
Good question, Tiffany. Good question, Diane. Anything else? Well, thank you so much for your participation in the live session, and have a great weekend.
You too.
Thank you.
you. Stay safe.